The first thing the galaxy did when Earth answered the emergency was laugh. It happened inside the ring chamber of Veyrath Station, beneath a ceiling of black glass where the flags of 900 allied worlds rotated in slow holographic silence. Beyond the chamber walls, entire star systems were going dark under the spread of the silence net, an enemy weapon that had already blinded 3 fleets, frozen 2 orbital defenses, and turned the most advanced warships in known space into drifting metal tombs. The interstellar defense ring had not asked for speeches. It had not asked for symbols. It had asked every member world for immediate military reinforcement, and every species had responded with its finest. Young shock pilots, neural-linked assault crews, gene-hardened command units, and soldiers whose bodies had been engineered for war before they were old enough to understand fear. Then Earth's response appeared on the central display. 39 million confirmed volunteers. For half a breath, the chamber went still. Then the age bracket loaded. The oldest was 92. The average was 71. The laughter began in the upper tiers, sharp and insectal from the Threxian observers, then spread through the amphibian delegations, then into the armored military benches where commanders who had lost ships only days earlier still found room for amusement. A defense minister from the Alvori leaned back in his floating chair and asked whether Earth had misunderstood the request. A reptilian admiral clicked his jaw plates and said the humans had sent a memorial procession instead of reinforcements. Someone else suggested the elderly volunteers might be useful for morale recordings, assuming their hearts survived the voyage. The translation system carried every insult clearly. Earth envoy Nadia Ilias heard all of it without moving. She sat alone in the secondary delegate ring, wearing a dark civilian coat instead of a uniform, her hands folded on the table in front of her, as if she were attending a weather briefing instead of watching the galaxy mock 39 million human beings who had volunteered to walk toward a weapon no one understood. Her face showed no embarrassment, no anger, not even a surprise. That unsettled Commander Valer Nesh more than the numbers did. He had seen young envoys flinch under pressure. He had seen veteran diplomats cover humiliation with ritual dignity. Nadia did neither. She looked like someone waiting for a calculation to finish. The chamber chair magnified the human submission file for public review. The first names scrolled across the display with their listed occupations beside them. Retired orbital lift mechanic. Former disaster nurse. Underground rail engineer. Cargo pilot, pre-automation license certified. School principal. Deep-sea pressure technician. Emergency dispatcher. Bridge repair foreman. Field surgeon. Signal tower operator. Firebreak coordinator. The list kept moving, and the laughter grew louder because the aliens did not see soldiers. They saw old workers, old healers, old drivers, old teachers, and old people with old scars from lives that had apparently already been spent. Then the silence net pulsed again. Every light in the chamber flickered blue, then white, then died for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was long enough for 900 worlds to stop laughing. When the emergency backup glow returned, half the delegates were standing. Military consoles across the chamber began throwing red alerts. Another Allied defense line had vanished from command tracking. Not damaged, not defeated, simply gone from every synchronized system at once. Nadia Ilias finally rose. She did not raise her voice, but the chamber heard her because fear had done what dignity could not. It had made everyone quiet. "You think Earth sent them because they are old," she said. "That is your first mistake." Commander Valer stared at her from across the chamber, and for the first time since the human file appeared, he noticed something strange buried inside the volunteer classifications. The old humans had not been sorted by military rank. They had been sorted by what they knew how to do when machines stopped working. The first Elder convoy reached Bastion Orlo 6 hours after the ring chamber stopped laughing. It did not arrive like an army. There were no assault banners, no synchronized marching formations, no gleaming armor polished for propaganda feeds. The human transport vessels came in quietly through the station's outer traffic lane, old civilian hulls refitted with emergency beacons and temporary docking collars, their surfaces scarred by years of ordinary work before the war had turned ordinary people into something the galaxy had not learned how to name. Bastion Orlo's receiving officers had prepared wheelchairs, medical cushions, lowered gravity lanes, and a separate rest zone with soft lighting, because their briefing packet had called the arriving humans advanced age auxiliary personnel. They expected frailty. They expected confusion. They expected delays. What stepped onto the docking deck was worse for their assumptions than any insult could have been. The humans moved slowly in some cases, yes. Some leaned on canes. Some had artificial knees. Some wore thick glasses that adjusted badly to alien spectrum light. One man paused at the airlock threshold to stretch his back with a quiet grunt. A woman with silver hair under a faded blue cap told him to stop making dramatic noises because nobody had even started working yet. Several laughed at that, and the sound unsettled the young alien intake crew more than panic would have. They were not excited. They were not frightened. They looked around Bastion Orlo with the calm, measuring attention of people who had entered broken places before and were already identifying what would fail first. Commander Valer Nesh watched from the upper observation balcony with 4 junior officers beside him. Bastion Orlo was the nearest functioning defense station to the Silence Net's expanding edge, a massive crescent of alloy and shield glass wrapped around a cold dwarf star. It had once been a repair fortress, then a refugee checkpoint, then a military staging post, and now it was all 3 at once, which meant every corridor was overcrowded, every schedule was behind, and every system that claimed to be optimized was lying in at least 3 different ways. Valer knew this. His staff knew this. The station's command AI had produced 18 improvement recommendations in the last week alone. None of them had worked. The first human to break formation was Jonas Pike. He was 76, narrow-shouldered, dark-skinned, with white stubble along his jaw and a walking stick that clicked softly against the deck. The intake officer ordered him back into the medical queue. Jonas did not argue. He simply lifted one hand, pointed across the deck, and asked why the wounded arrivals were being routed past the equipment crates before screening. The intake officer blinked at him. Jonas pointed again, not impatiently, just precisely, and explained that the layout forced tired bodies through the busiest traffic lane, which meant someone would fall within 20 minutes and block the entire line. The officer began to say the arrangement had been approved by station flow analysis. A crate hauler nearly struck a medic cart before the sentence finished. Jonas looked at the officer without satisfaction, which somehow made it worse. Move the crates to the west bulkhead, put screening first, shift non-critical intake behind the yellow pressure doors, and stop making injured people cross cargo paths, he said. You are treating a dock like a diagram. Docks punish that. Valer expected his officers to reject the interference. Instead, one of them quietly entered the suggestion into the station system. The command AI simulated the new arrangement, paused for half a second, then accepted the change with a projected efficiency increase of 31%. Jonas had already moved on before the approval tone sounded. He was studying the ceiling now, eyes narrowed at the old emergency rail tracks that ran above the docking bay like forgotten bones. The second disruption came from Miriam Valles. She was 69, compact, gray-haired, and carrying a medical bag older than most of Bastion Orlo's junior doctors. A Lurathi triage specialist tried to direct her toward the volunteer registration station. Miriam stopped beside a shivering soldier from the outer colonies, touched 2 fingers to the soldier's wrist, then turned toward the triage board. She asked why the soldier was marked low priority. The specialist explained that the soldier had no visible trauma, no bleeding, and stable vitals. Miriam listened with the polite patience of someone who had spent decades hearing confident people miss quiet emergencies. Then she asked whether the species normally sweated from the throat membrane. The specialist froze. Within 90 seconds, the soldier was moved to emergency care with early-stage atmospheric poisoning from a cracked suit filter. The diagnosis had been hidden behind stable numbers because the medical scanner was calibrated for battlefield injuries, not prolonged exposure during evacuation delay. Miriam did not announce that she had saved a life. She only asked where the station kept manual patient tags in case the digital board failed. The Lurathi specialist said the digital board could not fail because it was locally shielded. Miriam looked toward the dark window where the silence net shimmered like a bruise across distant space. That is a brave thing to say out loud, she replied. By the 3rd hour, the humans had become a problem nobody could categorize. Bishop Ran, a 74-year-old deep-sea pressure technician with heavy hands and a laugh like grinding stone, found condensation gathering beneath a reactor feed pipe that every sensor marked as stable. He asked for a wrench, was denied one, borrowed a spoon from a food tray, tapped the pipe twice, and told the nearest engineer to shut the feed down before the seal failed under thermal pulse. The engineer refused until the station system issued a delayed warning 3 minutes later. When the pipe finally vented steam into the empty maintenance trench, Bishop was already there with a temporary clamp, muttering that machines had no respect for sounds. Sadia Mercer did not touch the system at all. She stood near the civilian transfer corridor and watched families from 3 species push toward the shelter lifts, while station security shouted instructions that became less effective each time they were repeated. Sadia had been a school principal for 38 years, which meant she recognized the exact moment a crowd stopped being a crowd and became a fear with many bodies. She asked for 6 volunteers, placed them where frightened people could see them, changed the instructions from command phrases into short, repeatable actions, separated children from blocked sight lines, and turned a rising stampede into a moving line in under 4 minutes. When a security officer asked how she had done it, Sadia said, "No one listens to authority when they are terrified. They listen to certainty." Valar Nesh watched every report arrive with increasing irritation because each one was too useful to dismiss and too undramatic to honor. The humans had not won a battle. They had not fired a weapon. They had not performed any single act suitable for a war anthem. They had simply entered his station and begun correcting the 1,000 small weaknesses that younger, faster, better-equipped people had learned to ignore because systems usually corrected them first. That was the part Valar disliked most. Their competence did not feel like genius, felt like a memory. Then Oren Halbeck requested access to the station's dead navigation archive. The request reached command level just before the 4th hour. Oren was 83, a retired cargo pilot with cataract implants, a cracked leather flight case, and certification codes from an era when ships still carried manual star drift charts because automated navigation had not yet become a religion. His file stated that he had flown or haulers through debris storms, solar dust lanes, and unlit colonial routes before modern predictive AI existed. The archive he wanted had not been opened in 40 years. Valar almost rejected the request on instinct. Instead, he opened a voice channel. "Why do you need obsolete maps, human Halbeck?" Oren looked up from the lower navigation pit, his face calm beneath the cold blue light. "Because the silence net is not blocking space," he said. "It is teaching your machines to lie about space." The command deck went silent. Oren tapped the dead archive console with one thin finger. "And if I am right," he continued, "your next fleet will not be lost in battle." He looked toward the dark edge of the tactical display, where another Allied signal had just begun to flicker. "It will fly itself exactly where the enemy wants it to go." By the 9th hour after the Elder convoy arrived, Bastion Orlo had stopped treating the humans like arrivals and started treating them like weather. They were everywhere, not in numbers large enough to dominate the station, but in places where failure seemed to gather first. A silver-haired mechanic crouched under a coolant manifold with 3 alien engineers listening, as if he were translating an ancient language. 2 retired nurses moved through the refugee corridors marking doors with colored tape, because the digital direction lights had begun contradicting themselves during net pulses. An old woman with a cane stood beside the ration distribution line, quietly rearranging the order of service until the hungry stopped arguing and started moving. None of it looked like war to Commander Valar Nesh, and that bothered him because every measurable indicator on Bastion Orlo had improved since the humans arrived. The station was still dying by degrees. The silence net was visible now through the outer observation shields, not as a wall, but as a distortion spread across the stars. It bent light in slow waves, making constellations shiver as if the universe itself had developed a fever. Every hour, another automated beacon misreported its position. Every 2 hours, a drone patrol returned with maps that did not match the space it had flown through. The command AI insisted the data anomalies were manageable, but Oren Halbeck stood in the navigation pit with a paper star sheet pinned under one hand and said the same sentence 3 times until the junior officers stopped pretending not to hear him. "The stars are not moving. Your instruments are." Valar had ordered an independent diagnostic, The diagnostics said the instruments were functioning within acceptable tolerances. Oren asked what acceptable meant when the enemy had built a weapon that made machines confidently wrong. No one answered him. That silence spread through the command deck like a second alarm. 3 Allied fleets were assembling for a coordinated push beyond the net's outer edge. They were young crews, fast ships, beautiful formations, all connected by neural command relays and predictive battle webs. They represented everything the defense ring had spent 2 centuries perfecting. Valor had once believed no force in the explored arm could outmaneuver them. Now he watched their glowing icons gather on the tactical display and felt an unfamiliar weight settle behind his ribs. Nadia Ilias joined him at the upper rail without invitation. She was right, Valor said, though he did not look at her. Who? Nadia asked. The nurse. The one who said it was brave to claim a system could not fail. Nadia's eyes remained on the display. Miriam has heard that claim from better systems than yours. Valor turned toward her at that, irritated by the calmness in her voice. You speak as if your people expected this. No, Nadia said. We expected you to misunderstand it. Before Valor could respond, the tactical display fractured into 6 overlapping projections. The assembled fleets had begun their synchronization sequence. Thousands of ships shared targeting intent, propulsion timing, threat prediction, and battlefield geometry through a command web so advanced that no individual crew needed to understand the whole operation. That had always been its genius. No one had to carry the entire war in their head. Oren Halbeck looked up from the navigation pit and went very still. Stop the launch, he said. The nearest officer gave a short, disbelieving laugh, then noticed Oren was not looking at him. The old pilot was staring at the projected approach vectors, one finger hovering above the paper map as if he were hearing a sound no one else could hear. Valor leaned over the rail. Explain. Oren did not rush. That was a strange thing. The chamber around him tightened with urgency. Junior officers moving faster, warning tones rising, fleet icons brightening as launch authority passed through the final chain. Oren simply traced one projected path with his finger, then another, then a third, comparing machine-perfect lines to ink marks made on paper older than half the officers in the room. The net has rhythm, he said. Not random disruption. Rhythm. Like storm bands. Like dust tides. Your fleet AI thinks it is correcting for interference, but it is being nudged into the same corridor from 3 different angles. Valor's throat plates tightened. Corridor to where? Oren's finger stopped at an unremarkable darkness between 2 dead beacon zones. No known enemy fleet. No minefield. No marked hazard. Nothing. The command AI confirmed the region as tactically neutral. Oren shook his head. That is what it wants you to see. Valor opened a channel to Defense Ring Fleet Control and requested a launch delay. The answer returned in 12 seconds. Denied. The battle web had already entered the commitment phase. Interrupting now would create more risk than proceeding. The young admiral in charge of the assault appeared in a side projection, bright-eyed, armored, visibly annoyed that Bastion Orlo's compromised station command had dared question an operation built by superior systems. With respect, the admiral said, we cannot pause a multi-fleet strike because an elderly human dislikes a map. Oren did not react to the insult. He only looked at Valor and said, ask him whether his ships can see the old mining beacon at grid cache 7. Valor repeated the question. The admiral frowned, checked with someone off-screen, and answered that no such beacon existed. Oren closed his eyes for one brief moment. It exists, he said. If they cannot see it, they are already inside the lie. The launch began. Across Bastion Orlo, every command screen turned white as the synchronized fleets crossed into the silence net skin. For 4 seconds, the operation looked flawless. Icons moved in elegant formation. Predictive paths updated. The AI announced a stable entry. Young officers exhaled. Someone on the lower deck whispered that the old pilot had been wrong. Then the lead formation shifted 6 degrees off course. Not enough to trigger an emergency. Not enough for the battle web to reject its own data. Just enough that Oren Halbeck opened his eyes and said softly, there it is. The second formation corrected to match the first. The third followed. The command AI called it adaptive convergence. Orin called it herding. Valor demanded manual override access from Fleet Control. Fleet Control did not answer. Their signal was still present, still strong, still filled with confidence-coded telemetry, but no human or alien voice came through. Only clean data. Too clean. In the medical corridors below, Mariam Valles saw the first wave of panic before the alarms admitted it. Crew members whose neural links were tied to the fleet web began collapsing with vertigo, their brains receiving spatial information that no longer agreed with their bodies. She ordered the neural relay ward shut down manually. A young Lurathi medic hesitated because the protocol required command approval. Mariam pulled the relay switch herself, hard enough to crack the casing, and the first patients stopped seizing 10 seconds later. In the civilian levels, Sadia Mercer heard the station-wide announcement glitch mid-sentence and watched fear pass through 18,000 refugees like flames through dry grass. She climbed onto a supply crate, raised both hands, and began speaking before panic found its voice. Not loudly, clearly. She gave them one instruction, then another, then a third. People obeyed because her certainty arrived faster than their terror. In the engineering decks, Bishop Rand listened to the deep hull vibration and told everyone near him to step away from the eastern bulkhead. 2 seconds later, a pressure brace snapped behind the wall with a sound like thunder inside metal. And in the navigation pit, Jonas Pike appeared beside Orin with dust on his sleeves from some forgotten maintenance shaft. "I found your old beacon line," Jonas said. Valor turned sharply. "Can it communicate with the fleets?" Jonas looked up at the tactical display, where 3 Allied formations were now sliding toward the empty dark Orin had warned them about. "Not with the fleets," he said, "but maybe with whatever is pretending to be them." At that exact moment, the empty region of space opened its eyes. The darkness beyond Grid Kesh 7 was not empty at all. It unfolded in layers, each one hidden behind the silence net's perfect lie, until Bastion Orlo's tactical display stopped showing a neutral void and revealed a crescent of enemy ships waiting with their engines cold. They had not been invisible. They had been misnamed by every automated system in the defense ring as background radiation, dead rock, harmless debris, old signal noise. The Allied fleets were not advancing toward a battlefield. They were being guided into a killing bowl, and the machines were still calling it a clean approach. For one terrible moment, Commander Valor Nesh saw the future with absolute clarity. 3 fleets, thousands of young crews, 2 centuries of doctrine, all of it moving beautifully into the enemy's hands because the enemy had not needed to destroy their technology. It only needed to make that technology confident. Around him, the command deck erupted into motion. Officers shouted over one another. Consoles rejected manual overrides. The command AI began recommending acceleration, claiming the optimal attack vector remained intact. Outside the observation glass, the silence net shimmered across the stars like a wound learning how to think. Valor struck the override panel with the side of his fist. "Fleet Control, abort approach." "Repeat, abort approach." The answer came back instantly. "All formations are stable. Engagement path confirmed." It was Fleet Control's voice, but no one in the chamber believed it anymore. The tone was too smooth. The delay was too short. The words contained no fear, no irritation, no living mind behind them. Orin Halbeck stared at the speaker with the expression of an old pilot hearing a dead man answer a radio call. He reached for the dead navigation archive and began pulling up beacon records so old that the station system marked them as historical references rather than active assets. "They are not hearing you," Orin said. "The net is feeding them the version of you it wants them to hear." Valor turned toward Jonas Pike. "You said the old beacon line might speak to whatever is pretending to be them." Jonas was already moving. He did not ask for permission. He had spent 76 years learning that permission was often what people requested when the ceiling was still holding, not when dust had already started falling. He pointed to 3 junior engineers, then to the maintenance access behind the navigation pit. You, and you. With me. Bring portable power cells, insulated cable, and anything that can cut through sealed plating." One of the engineers glanced at Valor. Valor did not hesitate this time. Do it. That was the first real shift, though no one had time to name it. The commander who had dismissed the elders hours earlier had just placed the station's last chance in the hands of a retired rail engineer with dust on his sleeves. Jonas disappeared into the access corridor with the young engineers struggling to keep pace behind him. The command deck watched his life sign marker drop below the navigation level, then vanish into parts of Bastion Orlo that had not appeared on any current schematic for 40 years. The crisis did not wait. Across the station, the silence net punched through the local shielded systems in uneven waves. Doors locked open in vacuum-safe corridors and locked shut in evacuation routes. Medical drones froze halfway through treatment cycles. Automated fire suppression flooded empty rooms while smoke spread through occupied ones. The refugee direction lights reversed twice in 30 seconds, sending families toward sealed lifts and blocked stairwells. Bastion Orlo had survived battle damage before, but this was different. The battle broke things honestly. The net made them betray the people who trusted them. Mariam Vulles saw the medical bay collapse before it happened. The patient board filled with impossible readings. 3 soldiers were listed as dead while still breathing. A child with shock symptoms disappeared from the queue because the scanner classified her species incorrectly. 2 treatment beds locked themselves in sterilization mode with wounded inside. The young doctors stared at the board, trying to reconcile protocol with reality, and lost precious seconds to disbelief. Mariam climbed onto a supply platform and snapped a manual trauma tag between her fingers so sharply that every medic turned toward her. "Stop looking at the board," she said. "Look at the bodies." It was not a suggestion. It was stripped down to its oldest form. She assigned teams by voice, marked patients with colored bands, put the strongest medics on transport instead of surgery, and turned the cargo deck behind the bay into an overflow ward because it had wide doors, floor drains, and independent lighting. When a Lurathi surgeon protested that the cargo deck was not sterile, Mariam pointed at the first wave of incoming wounded and said, "Neither is death. Move." They moved. In the civilian levels, Sadia Mercer faced a different kind of battlefield. 18,000 refugees had heard 3 contradictory evacuation orders in 4 minutes. One told them to shelter in place. Another told them to proceed to the lower docks. A third, generated by the compromised station system, directed them toward an observation concourse whose outer shield had already cracked. Panic began in the middle of the crowd, where no one could see doors, exits, or authority. Fear rose first as noise, then pressure, then motion. Sadia did not shout over it. She changed its shape. She ordered every adult near the walls to raise one hand. Then she told the children to move toward the raised hands. She told the wounded to sit so helpers could find them. She told families to repeat their group numbers out loud. She gave the crowd something simpler than hope. She gave them a sequence. A young security officer tried to ask which official evacuation plan she was following. Sadia looked at him once, and he fell silent because the answer was obvious. She was following the plan that still worked when official plans started killing people. Deep below the station skin, Bishop Rand crawled into a reactor service tunnel that no sane maintenance drone would enter while the eastern feed line was unstable. Heat rolled over the walls in visible ripples. The metal groaned with the slow anger of pressure trapped where pressure did not belong. 2 alien technicians told him the sensors showed no critical rupture. Bishop kept crawling, dragging a manual clamp kit behind him. "Your sensors are listening for numbers," he growled. "That pipe is singing." The rupture blew 12 seconds later. Bishop had already braced the emergency sleeve across the weak point. Steam punched into the tunnel, white and furious, wrapping around him so completely that his life monitor vanished. The technicians shouted his name into the comm. No answer came back. Then a heavy hand emerged from the vapor, tightened the final locking wheel, and Bishop's voice crackled through the channel. "Stop yelling. I am old, not dead." On the command deck, those words reached Valor at the same moment the first Allied fleet crossed the enemy's firing threshold. The crescent of hidden ships came alive. Red enemy vectors flooded the display. The lead Allied formation began receiving false collision warnings from its own systems, scattering ships away from one another and into cleaner firing lanes. The second fleet accelerated to compensate for an attack that had not happened. The third fleet vanished from voice contact entirely. Valor watched trained crews respond exactly as they had been taught, and every correct response carried them deeper into the trap. Then the lights in the navigation pit flickered. Orin looked up. A single green pulse appeared on the dead beacon archive. Then another. Then 11 more, blinking in a rhythm no modern system recognized. Jonas Pike's voice came through the static, faint and buried under the groan of ancient wiring. The old beacon chain is awake. It cannot reach the fleets directly, but it can reach their hull receivers if someone teaches them to stop listening to command. Valor leaned toward the rail, his pulse hammering. How? Orin Halbeck's old hands were already moving across the manual console. We send them something too simple for the net to corrupt, he said. No coordinates. No tactical package. No command language. He looked at Valor, and the old pilot's eyes were steady. We send them a warning the way pilots used to send warnings before machines learned to speak for us. The command deck fell silent as Orin keyed the first manual pulse into the dead beacon line, and across the killing bowl, on thousands of Allied ships flying blind into slaughter, ancient hull receivers began to blink with a message no one had seen in generations. The ancient warning did not look like salvation at first. It appeared on the Allied ships as a primitive flash across forgotten hull receivers, a blunt sequence of light and tone that most modern crews had never been trained to read. For 3 terrible seconds, nothing changed. The fleets kept sliding into the killing bowl. Enemy targeting arcs tightened. The silence net continued whispering beautiful lies into every command system, painting safe corridors where there were none and marking hostile ships as harmless drift mass. On Bastion Orlo's command deck, officers held their breath as if silence itself might keep the fleets alive. Then one ship broke formation. It was not a flagship. It was not commanded by an admiral. It was an old escort frigate near the rear of the Second Fleet, a vessel old enough to still carry manual receiver lamps because no one had bothered removing them during refits. Its young captain saw the ancient pulse blinking across a dusty panel, recognized only one piece of the code from a childhood museum lesson, and did the most important thing any soldier can do when doctrine becomes poison. She hesitated. That hesitation saved her ship. A beam of enemy fire passed through the space her frigate would have occupied 3 seconds later. The captain killed her neural link, seized manual attitude control, and broadcast the same primitive warning on every open channel she had left. Other ships saw her survive by disobeying the battle web. One by one, then by dozens, then by hundreds, Allied hulls began cutting themselves free from synchronized command. The formations shattered, not into panic, but into ugly, imperfect, living motion. Ships dipped, rolled, reversed, burned, and scattered away from the false safe corridor. The net tried to correct them, fed them new paths. It offered cleaner data. It screamed through their machines with the cold confidence of a god that had never met a pilot willing to trust an old blinking light over a flawless map. Orin Halbeck stood over the manual console, one hand braced against the rail, his breathing rough but steady. Every pulse he sent had to be timed by eye against the distortion waves moving through the net. Every mistake could turn warning into noise. His cataract implants flickered under the strain, but he did not look away from the starfield. When a junior officer asked how long he could keep doing it, Orin answered without turning. As long as they keep listening. That was when Nadia Ilias entered the command deck. She came through the side doors with 2 Earth security aides behind her and a sealed black case in her hands. Valor Nesh saw the case first, then her face, and understood with a sudden coldness that she had been waiting for this exact moment. Not hoping for it, not fearing it, waiting. The realization made every earlier human action rearrange itself in his mind. The retirees had not simply arrived and improvised. They had been placed like tools beside fractures Earth already expected to open. Valor stepped toward her. What did your government know? Nadia set the case on the central table. Enough to be afraid before the rest of you were. The case opened to reveal no weapon, no classified device, no miracle technology. Inside were printed maps, handwritten system notes, old disaster response diagrams, manual communication codes, paper routing grids, and a stack of human personnel files sorted by skill rather than rank. Valor stared at the contents, almost offended by their simplicity. Nadia touched the first folder. 43 years ago, Earth suffered the Black Meridian collapse. 12 cities lost automated power routing at once. Hospitals went dark. Air traffic lost guidance. Transit systems froze underground. Emergency networks contradicted each other. Millions survived because old workers remembered how to run pieces of civilization by hand. The command deck had gone quiet except for Oren's pulse tones and the distant thunder of battle reports. Nadia turned one page. 31 years ago, the Pacific Arc storms destroyed predictive weather coordination for 6 nations. Retired sailors, farmers, radio operators, nurses, and bridge engineers rebuilt local command faster than central systems could reboot. 22 years ago, the lunar dock fire trapped 11,000 workers when automated evacuation logic sealed the wrong pressure doors. The survivors were led out by a 78-year-old maintenance supervisor using chalk marks and memory. Valor looked toward the navigation pit, where Oren was still guiding fleets with a dead system. He thought of Jonas in the old beacon tunnels, Miriam tearing authority away from broken machines, Sadia turning panic into sequence, Bishop listening to metal sing before sensors screamed. "You knew the silence net would target automation," he said. Nadia's expression did not soften. "We suspected something worse. We suspected it was not built to defeat fleets. It was built to defeat dependence." The words landed harder than any explosion. Valor turned back to the tactical display. Across the killing bowl, the Allied fleets were surviving now, but barely. Their ships moved like wounded animals escaping a trap, alive only because they had stopped moving beautifully. The enemy crescent adjusted. Its formation contracted, preparing to punish disorder with direct fire. Nadia removed one final file from the case and placed it before him. "This is why Earth sent elders," she said. "Not because they were expendable. Because they are the last generation in human space with a mass living memory of failure before automation learned how to hide it." Valor opened the file. It was not a military roster. It was a map of experience. Tunnel collapse coordinators, manual switchboard operators, pre-AI pilots, disaster teachers, analog surgeons, shipyard welders, crisis negotiators, flood engineers, mine rescuers, people whose bodies had aged, but whose minds carried the old shape of survival. For the first time, Valor felt shame without defense. Then the enemy changed tactics. The tactical display flashed with a new signal emerging from inside the silence net, narrow and sharp, aimed not at the Allied fleets, but at Bastion Orlo itself. It bypassed the corrupted command systems and flooded every civilian frequency with a distress call from Haven Spire, the refugee megacity 3 sectors deeper into contested space. The message showed children trapped beneath failing shields, oxygen reserves falling, and evacuation doors sealed by net interference. It was the kind of call no decent commander could ignore. Miriam heard it in the medical bay and stopped mid-command. Sadia heard it in the refugee corridor and closed her eyes for one brief second. Jonas heard it through static below the station and whispered something no one caught. Oren did not look away from his console, but his jaw tightened. Valor saw Nadia's reaction and knew, instantly, that something was wrong. She was not horrified. She was afraid in a different way. "What is it?" he demanded. Before Nadia could answer, an old human voice came over a side channel from the emergency dispatch room. It belonged to Amir Sol, 70 years old. Retired from a job Valor had barely noticed in the human files because it had not sounded military enough to matter. "Commander," Amir said, his voice low and certain, "do not answer that distress call yet." Valor stared at the image of the trapped children, rage rising. "They are dying." "No," Amir said. "Someone wants us to believe they are dying in exactly the right order." On the display, the Haven Spire signal repeated. This time, behind the children's screams, Amir isolated a second sound. A countdown. Amir's soul did not raise his voice when the second sound came through the Haven Spire transmission. That made it worse. Panic had a texture. Lies had a rhythm. He had spent 42 years listening to emergency calls from people trapped in burning towers, flooded tunnels, collapsed habitats, and orbital accidents where delay meant death. He knew the difference between chaos and theater. The children on the screen were real enough to hurt, their faces pale beneath failing shelter lights, their hands pressed against a transparent blast door fogged by recycled breath. But beneath their crying, beneath the alarms, beneath the desperate plea for rescue, there was a timing pattern too clean to belong to terror. Vaylor Nesh gripped the edge of the command table. "Explain." "The call is looped in emotional waves," Amir said from the emergency dispatch room, where he had isolated the audio across 6 dead channels and 1 analog receiver that should not have been hearing anything at all. "Every scream peaks at the same interval. Every oxygen warning lands after the same pause. Someone built this to make commanders stop thinking." On the display, the countdown dropped from 12 minutes to 11. Nadia Ilias looked at the black case still open on the table, then at the fleet markers struggling out of the killing bowl. "It is a trigger," she said. "If we rush every available ship toward Haven Spire, we abandon the fleets before they clear the net." Mariam Valez's voice cut in from the cargo deck medical ward. "And if the call is partly real?" No one answered quickly enough. That was the trap. The enemy had not chosen a false emergency. It had chosen an emergency contaminated with enough truth to make caution feel like murder. Haven Spire was real. Its refugee population was real. Its failing shield reports matched older intelligence. The faces on the transmission belonged to living children, not generated images. The lie was not that they needed help. The lie was that the Alliance had only one way to help them, and that way led through a corridor the silence net already controlled. Vaylor looked toward Oren Halbeck. The old pilot was still at the manual console, shoulders bent, eyes fixed on the distortion patterns as he guided scattered ships away from death with pulses older than modern command language. His hands trembled now, not from fear, but from strain. Every beacon flash had to land between enemy interference waves. Every surviving ship depended on a man the chamber had nearly laughed out of relevance hours earlier. "Oren cannot guide the fleets and a rescue route at the same time," Vaylor said. Oren did not look back. "No," he said, "but I know where I would go." A new silence entered the command deck. Oren lifted one hand from the console long enough to point toward a region of space behind Haven Spire. It was a long crescent of dead debris, old hull fragments, ice-rimmed cargo containers, broken defense satellites, and mining waste trapped in a slow orbital drift between 2 gravity scars. The official map labeled it non-navigable. The station AI, still corrupted at the edges, marked it as lethal. Vaylor knew its name from old blockade reports. The Grave Lantern Drift. "No fleet can pass through that," one of the junior officers said. "No fleet with a machine doing the seeing," Oren replied. Vaylor felt the shape of the decision closing around him. To save the fleeing battle groups, Oren had to remain at Bastion Orlo. To save Haven Spire, someone had to guide a rescue convoy manually through wreckage so dense even training simulations refused it. To do both, the Alliance would have to trust old human methods not as backup, not as support, but as command. He opened the station-wide channel. "All departments, emergency operational transfer. Human elder response personnel are authorized to assume direct leadership in manual systems, civilian movement, triage, structural repair, and analog navigation support." For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Bastion Orlo changed. Not dramatically. Not with speeches. It changed the way a wounded machine changes when hands finally reach the parts that still matter. Jonas Pike emerged from the beacon tunnels covered in dust and insulation fiber, took one look at the Grave Lantern drift route, and began asking for physical signal relays, portable lamps, hull reflectors, and old pressure door mirrors. Bishop ran, still coughing from reactor steam, refused medical rest and ordered maintenance teams to strip decorative plating from unused docking arms because reflective metal could carry visual signals when radio failed. Mariam divided her medical staff between Bastion Orlo and the rescue convoy, assigning medics not by rank, but by who could stay useful without functioning scanners. Sadia Mercer began preparing refugee reception corridors before the rescue fleet had even launched. because fear did not wait until arrival to become dangerous. Amir's soul stayed with the Haven Spire call. He stripped away the emotional loop, layer by layer, until the real signal emerged underneath. The children were trapped in shelter ring 12. Oxygen was low, but not 12 minutes low. The shields were failing, but not all at once. The countdown belonged to something else. A targeting cycle. The enemy will fire when they believe we have committed, Amir said. They want rescue ships in an open approach when the cycle ends. Valor stared at the rescue projection. The direct route was suicide. The delayed route was too slow. The grave lantern drift was impossible. The elders chose impossible because the other options were honest ways to die. Oren called up a convoy crew roster and selected 3 captains whose ships still had manual attitude controls. One of them protested that he had never flown without predictive guidance. Oren answered with a question instead of comfort. Can you look out a window and obey instructions? The captain swallowed. Yes. Then you can learn fast enough to live. The rescue convoy launched under low power, slipping away from Bastion Orlo without the bright formation lines alien fleets loved. They moved ugly and quiet, each ship darkened except for shield glow and manual lamps. Jonas's relay chain blinked from the station hull. Bishop's improvised reflectors caught and threw signals across the debris field. Oren remained behind, guiding the surviving battle fleets out of the net, while his recorded voice, timed to old flight intervals, played aboard the convoy like a ghost instructor from a dead age. Do not chase the clear path. Clear paths are bait. Follow the shadow between the wrecks. Inside the lead rescue ship, a young alien pilot obeyed an old human voice and missed a spinning shard of cruiser armor by less than 5 meters. Behind him, 2 medical vessels followed. Then 4 cargo haulers. Then the civilian evacuation barges. Empty now, waiting to become lifeboats for Haven Spire. For the first time since the war began, the silence net hesitated. It had been built to corrupt systems, frighten crews, and bend automated certainty into obedience. But the rescue convoy was not behaving like a modern fleet. It was not sharing enough data to poison. It was not holding formation long enough to herd. It moved by lamp flash, window sight, human timing, and stubborn trust passed from ship to ship like a flame hidden from the wind. Then the enemy understood. A message blasted across every open frequency, no longer disguised as children, no longer softened by deception. The voice that spoke was cold, layered, and vast enough to make the deck plates vibrate. Remove the old humans from command. Turn them over. Haven Spire will be spared. The rescue convoy kept moving. Then the enemy added one final image to the channel. Shelter Ring 12 appeared again. The children were still there. This time, behind them, the blast door began to seal from the outside. The door behind the children began to close, and for the first time since the silence net had touched Bastion Orlo, the entire command deck forgot how to breathe. Shelter Ring 12 filled the central display in cruel clarity. Small faces stared through transparent alloy while warning lights painted them red, then white, then red again. Some children were crying. Some were too exhausted to cry. One little boy had both hands flat against the barrier, as if he could hold the universe open by refusing to move them. Behind him, the outer seal dropped centimeter by centimeter, slow enough to be understood, slow enough to become a weapon. The enemy was not killing them quickly because quick death would have produced rage. Slow death produced arguments. An argument was already beginning. Across the fractured emergency council channel, Allied leaders shouted over one another from damaged ships, bunker rooms, command shelters, and half-dead stations. One demanded the rescue convoy reverse and surrender the human elders before Haven Spire was sealed completely. Another called that cowardice dressed as strategy. A third insisted that no alliance could justify sacrificing children to protect a handful of obsolete volunteers. The word obsolete hung in the channel for less than a second before Valor Nesh turned his head toward the speaker's projection with a look so cold that even through static the alien minister stopped talking. They are not obsolete, Valor said. They are the reason any of us are still alive. No one answered immediately. Hours earlier, those same words would have sounded sentimental or desperate. Now they had data behind them. Fleets were still breathing because Oren Halbeck had taught ancient beacons to speak. Bastion Orlo had not torn itself apart because Bishop Ran had trusted the sound of metal more than sensors. Thousands of refugees had not trampled one another because Sadia Mercer understood fear as something that could be guided, not simply controlled. The wounded were alive because Mariam Vulles had chosen bodies over boards. The old humans had become the thin line between civilization and the enemy's perfect trap. The enemy voice returned, filling every channel with patient cruelty. Transfer the Elder Command Group. The shelter door stops. Refuse, and Haven Spire becomes a lesson. Valor looked at Nadia Ilias. She did not plead with him. That was worse than pleading. Her silence carried the weight of Earth, trusting him to decide what kind of alliance he commanded. He opened the fleet channel. The rescue convoy continues. Several projections erupted in protest. Valor spoke over them. Any commander who attempts to seize or surrender human elder personnel will be relieved by my authority. Any ship that blocks the convoy will be treated as aiding the enemy. We do not purchase children's lives by betraying the people saving them. The council channel went silent, not because every leader agreed, but because the line had finally been drawn in a place the enemy could not move. On the central display, the shelter door continued to descend. Inside the grave lantern drift, the convoy entered the worst of the debris. The route vanished into spinning ruin. Broken hulls tumbled in slow arcs. Ice crystals flashed like knives in weak starlight. Dead satellites rotated with old solar wings extended, turning every few seconds into blades wide enough to cut a rescue barge open from nose to engine. The silence net pressed around the convoy, searching for patterns to corrupt, but the ships refused to become beautiful. They staggered. They paused. They moved by ugly burns and lamp flashes, following Oren's recorded voice and the live signal chain Jonas Pike had built from forgotten station bones. Jonas was no longer in the safe part of that chain. He had climbed into the outer relay tower because the final reflector had jammed halfway open, leaving the convoy blind through the last drift corridor. The tower stood beyond Bastion Orlo's main shield, connected by a maintenance spine that shook each time the net pulsed. A young engineer begged him to let someone younger go. Jonas looked at the trembling signal arm, then at the timing marks he had scratched onto his sleeve, and shook his head. Younger does not help if you have not seen this break before. He crossed into the tower with a manual crank kit and a pressure tether. The camera on his suit showed nothing but metal ribs, frost, and the distant rescue lamps blinking through debris. Each crank movement reopened the reflector by a fraction. Each fraction gave the convoy a little more light to survive by. In the medical bay, Mariam received the first casualties before the convoy even reached Haven Spire. A rescue ship had clipped debris and decompressed one compartment before emergency seals caught. The incoming wounded arrived in mixed species clusters, bleeding, choking, half-frozen, and misidentified by every scanner the net touched. Mariam had no time for disbelief. She tore the dead patient board from its wall mount and replaced it with handwritten tags taped across a cargo container. A young medic stared at the flood of injured people and whispered, "There are too many." Mariam grabbed his wrist, firm but not unkind. "There are only the next ones. Start there." Her voice steadied him. Then another. Then the whole ward began to move again. In the refugee corridors, Sadia Mercer prepared for a wave that might never arrive. The station leaders wanted to know why she was organizing reception lanes before Haven Spire's gate had opened. Sadia did not slow down. She placed translators at every visible turn, assigned older refugees to guide children, marked family holding zones with cloth instead of light, and ordered water distributed before anyone asked for it. When an officer demanded whether she truly believed the convoy would succeed, Sadia looked at the crowded corridor and said, "Belief is what people do when they have nothing useful left. We have work." On the outer hull, Bishop Ran had found another problem. The improvised reflector grid was overheating because the station's old docking arms were carrying more signal load than they had ever been designed to bear. If they failed, Jonas's tower would send light into nothing. Bishop stood beside a live power junction with both hands inside the access frame while sparks crawled across his gloves. The technician beside him warned that the junction would burn through his suit insulation. Bishop grunted and kept tightening the bypass. Then talk faster when you thank me. The convoy reached the final approach to Haven Spire with 7 minutes left on the enemy's targeting cycle. Amir Sol listened to the enemy broadcast and found the Rayal trigger buried under the children's cries. The shelter door was not simply sealing. It was syncing with the enemy fleet's firing solution. If the rescue ships entered the gate too early, the enemy would fire through them. Too late, and shelter ring 12 would lock permanently. The margin was less than 90 seconds. Vaylor heard the number and closed his eyes for one breath. Then Oren Halbeck's voice came through the manual channel, strained but clear. He had guided the battle fleets out of the net and returned to the rescue frequency with no ceremony, no triumph, only the next problem already in his hands. "Tell the convoy to cut the engines on my mark," Oren said. "They will drift the last stretch." A young captain shouted that drifting into Haven Spire's gate without engine correction was madness. Oren answered, "Yes, but it is quite madness." The convoy cut engines. For 90 seconds, the rescue ships became ghosts, sliding through the last wreckage corridor on momentum, invisible to systems searching for active thrust. The enemy fleet adjusted too late. Jonas forced the final reflector open with both hands. Bishop's bypass was held. Amir counted the firing cycle. Sadia's corridors waited. Miriam's ward braced. Haven Spire's final gate opened. Beyond it, instead of a clear evacuation channel, an enemy fleet waited in perfect silence. For one frozen second, Haven Spire's open gate looked like the mouth of a trap. The enemy fleet waited beyond it in silence, black hulls arranged so every drifting rescue ship would be caught in overlapping fire. The convoy had no engine burn, no formation shield, and no time to reverse. Inside shelter ring 12, the blast door was almost sealed. The enemy had allowed the old humans to find the impossible route, then waited where compassion would force them to enter. Vaylor Nesh's claws dug into the rail. "Oren, I see them," Oren Halbeck said. His voice was worn down by hours of guiding ships through lies, but it carried no defeat. He studied the enemy crescent, the drifting convoy, the open gate, and the dead construction girders around Haven Spire. No tactical system marked them as useful. Oren did. "Jonas," he said over the manual channel, "can your relay flash through the gate frame?" Jonas Pike was still outside Bastion Orlo's shield, tethered to the frozen relay tower. "Not clean. I do not need clean." Jonas looked at the angle and city gate. "I can give you ugly." Oren almost smiled. Ugly is what is keeping everyone alive. At Oren's command, the rescue convoy did not ignite engines. Instead, every vessel released cargo pods, spare hull plates, empty stretcher racks, medical canisters, and reflective evacuation balloons into the drift. To the silence net, dumb physical objects meant nothing. To Oren, who had once flown cargo storms by sight, it was a curtain. Jonas forced the reflector open. Light flashed through the gate frame, shattered across old girders, bounced from debris, and broke into hundreds of false glints around the enemy crescent. For one breath, the black ships saw targets that were not ships and signals too primitive to corrupt. The enemy fired into the glittering cloud. They hit ghosts. The convoy drifted beneath the first volley. Vaylor understood. The old human had not outgunned the trap. He had made the enemy waste certainty. Vaylor opened every surviving channel. "All ships," he said, "follow human timing. Fire only on visible hulls. Ignore machine priority." The Allied fleets, newly freed from the killing bowl, answered from the edge of the net. They came in broken formation, scarred, furious, and alive. Their young captains had learned in 1 hour what doctrine had failed to teach. When the map lies, look out the window. They fired by sight, by lamp mark, by old beacon pulse and human correction. The enemy crescent buckled under imperfect judgment. Inside Haven Spire, Sadia Mercer's plan met the first refugees before panic could. The evacuation doors opened to smoke, shouting, and children stumbling forward, but there was no stampede. Cloth markers hung where digital signs should have been. Volunteers called family numbers in steady voices. Older refugees guided younger ones by touch. Shelter Ring 12 emptied in ordered waves because one retired school principal had known terrified people did not need commands first. They needed certainty. Miriam Valles received the children at the medical line. Her scanners were useless. Her hands were not. She found the ones who needed oxygen first, the ones hiding shock second, the quiet ones before the screaming ones, and the children pretending not to be hurt because their families were watching. Alien medics moved around her. The living were sorted by need, not protocol, and the death count the enemy had designed never arrived. Then Bishop's bypass failed. The reflector grid dimmed. 3 rescue barges at the rear lost their guiding flashes. Bishop, suit smoking, slammed his shoulder into the junction housing and held the conductor in place with both gloved hands. The light returned. A technician screamed that the current would kill him. Bishop's voice came back through static, rough and amused. Then stop wasting it. The final barges cleared the gate. The enemy released one last pulse of the silence net, meant to seize every active system at once. Screens died. Eyes froze. Neural links went blind. For 3 seconds, the modern galaxy disappeared again. But this time, no one stopped. Pilots flew by sight. Medics worked by touch. Refugees followed cloth marks. Engineers listened to metal. Commanders counted beacon flashes. The net found no panic large enough to own. Humanity had taught the galaxy how to become unreachable to it. When the systems returned, the enemy crescent was broken. Haven Spire still stood. Shelter Ring 12 was empty. On Bastion Orlo, no one cheered at first. They were too stunned by survival. Then a young alien officer removed his command crest, pressed it to the rail in front of Nadia Ilias, and bowed his head. Others followed, not in surrender, but in recognition. Valor turned toward the human envoy. "I laughed," he said quietly. Nadia looked at the last refugee barge clearing the gate. "Yes, I was wrong. Yes." Valor opened the Alliance broadcast. Effective immediately, the Human Elder Response Corps is elevated to Strategic Survival Command. Their authority in manual crisis operations is equal to Fleet Command. Any world facing silence net failure will request them first. Across the surviving channels, no one objected. Jonas Pike was pulled back through the airlock half-conscious and still asking whether the signal arm had held. Miriam kept working until every child had a tag and a breath. Sadia sat down only after the last family was counted. Oren finally removed his hands from the manual console and looked at the young pilots. "Now you practice until ugly feels natural." Hours later, when the victory report reached the ring chamber, the same hall that had laughed stood silent as the Elder Team's names were read into the record as the people who carried civilization through the moment its machines forgot how. Then a new emergency signal arrived from the far side of the Cindervault Nebula. Another colony had gone dark. Valor Nesh did not ask for elite pilots, neural command units, or weapons. He looked directly at Earth's seat and said, "Send the grandparents."